It was wonderful. Thank you. Oh, what? Okay, well, I don't want to take too long about this, but in honor of tonight's speaker, former MBC President Emily, I am throwing back and I'm doing an MBC President Science Day today. So, it will be quick.
Most of you are familiar with the concept of speciation. That is, the evolution of new birds through the occupation of different ecological niches. For example, if a population of birds adapts to feed on a new, specialized food source, then it might evolve over time into a distinct species, such as was seen with the Galapagos finches. Now, one notable food source exploited by birds is fruit. Some birds depend almost entirely on fruit. Some birds depend on fruit on a seasonal basis. What's interesting is that many birds can eat fruit that is unpalatable or distasteful to mammals, which allows birds a wider selection of foods to survive on. So the question that arises with that is, what's the role of taste in all of this? Do birds even have a sense of taste? Until quite recently, scientists did not think that birds had much taste sense. I think they looked at the creepy, crawly, bitter, nasty things that birds could eat, and they thought, if they had a sense of taste, they wouldn't eat that. But those scientists were wrong. Like other vertebrates, birds do have taste buds, and they can sense the usual taste modalities like salty, sweet, sour, and so on. Okay, so that brings us to June of this year, 2025, when a group of scientists made an interesting discovery. The scientists found that birds have a genetic modification to their taste sense that allows them to consume extremely sour fruits. In order to understand, to explain what these scientists discovered, I'm just going to give you my one-slide, 5-cent explanation of the taste sense. Vertebrates detect taste through taste buds. Bundles of cells located in the mouth, the oral cavity. Within the bud, different cells detect different taste modalities: salty, sour, sweet, bitter, umami. Now, take sour taste. Does anyone know what makes something sour? It's acidity. Sour foods are acid foods. A lemon, for example, is full of citric acid, and it has a pH between 2 and 3. So when the acid dissolves in the mouth, it releases a surplus of hydrogen ions or protons, and on the surface of the sour taste receptor cell are a bunch of protein molecules which can detect the protons and allow them to enter the cell. Once inside the cell, the protons, through a series of steps, generate an electrical signal, which travels down a facial nerve to the lower centers of the brain, and so on up to the cortex, where you get the consciousness of sour taste. So what the scientists in this study focused on was a sour sensing molecule, which is found in all vertebrate animals. And what they found is, they found something very interesting. They found that the bird version of this sour sensing molecule behaves very differently from the version in mammalian species, such as humans. So here, in the mouse, much like in humans, we see that the higher the acidity, and remember that lower pH means higher acidity, the higher the acidity, the bigger the electrical signal generated by the sour sensing molecule. And that makes sense. More acid, bigger signal from the molecule, and therefore a greater perception of sour taste. But in birds, and they examined this molecule from two very different species, the pigeon and the canary, they saw something quite different, which is that as acidity increases a little, the signal does increase a bit, as you might expect. But as the acidity increases a lot, towards that of a lemon, for example, the signal becomes very small. And this implies that birds will not perceive a high acid food or fruit as being particularly sour. The scientists went on to pinpoint 4 different mutations or modifications in the sour sensing molecule in birds that accounted for this change of behavior. And if you look at the sequence of this molecule across vertebrate species from humans to fish, you will see that all birds and only birds have at least 3 of these changes or modifications, and only songbirds have all 4 of them. So the conclusion that the scientists drew was that birds have an unusual tolerance for sour tasting foods that probably allows them to exploit a wider range of fruits than mammals, and in turn might help account for the tremendous speciation of the songbird clade over the past millions of years. And that's my science bit. And that's my science bit.